The moment the general saw the ring on my finger, everything changed. The room was full polished shoes, sharp uniforms, flags everywhere, but suddenly, it all faded into background noise. He didn't smile. He didn't greet me. He just stared at my hand, like it wasn't supposed to exist. Then he asked, very quietly, "Where did you get that?" For a second, I almost laughed. It was just an old ring. Worn, simple, nothing special. But his eyes, they weren't curious. They were afraid. "It was my grandfather's," I said. "He passed away last month." The general's jaw tightened. He swallowed hard, then leaned in slightly. "We need to talk," he said. "Now." And right there, in a room full of decorated officers, I realized something I'd never even considered before. The man my own family had ignored. The man they let die alone might not have been who we thought he was at all. I didn't move. For a second, I just stood there, trying to make sense of what had just happened. A 4-star general someone people stepped aside for without thinking was looking at me like I was holding something I shouldn't even have. Not valuable. Not rare. Dangerous. Slowly, almost without thinking, I looked down at the ring again. Same worn metal. Same faint scratches along the edge. Same small symbol carved inside something I'd seen 100 times and never questioned. To me, it had always been simple. It was my grandfather's. That was it. "I don't understand," I said. "It's just a ring." The general didn't respond right away. He stepped a little closer. Close enough that I could see the tension in his jaw. The way his eyes weren't studying me. They were studying it. "How long have you had it?" he asked. "About a month," I said. "Since my grandfather passed." Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise. Recognition. "Did he ever tell you what it meant?" he asked. I almost said no. That would have been the easy answer. But then, a memory came back. I was maybe 16, sitting on his back porch in the middle of summer, the air thick, cicadas loud in the trees. He was holding a cup of black coffee, like always. I remember pointing at the ring. "Where'd you get that?" He didn't even look at it, just said, real quiet, "It reminds me who I am." That was it. No story. No explanation. At the time, I thought it didn't mean anything. Now, I wasn't so sure. "No," I said finally. He never explained it. The general exhaled slowly, like that answer confirmed something he already feared. Then he asked the question that changed everything. What was his name? "William Hale." For a brief second, he went completely still, not confused, not surprised. He knew that name, and suddenly, so did I. Because the truth was, before that moment, my grandfather's name had never carried any weight. Not in my family. Not in our house. If anything, it carried the opposite. William Hale wasn't someone people talked about with pride. He was the person conversations moved around. He lived alone in a small, aging house on the edge of town about 15 minutes past the last decent grocery store. Down a cracked 2-lane road most people had no reason to take. The place always smelled faintly like motor oil and old coffee. The kind of house where things got fixed instead of replaced. That was him. He fixed things. Broken chairs, rusted hinges, kids' bikes from down the street. But when it came to people, my family acted like there was nothing there to fix. My parents never said anything outright cruel, not at first. It was quieter than that. More subtle. The kind of dismissal that builds over years until it feels normal. "He's just difficult," my mother would say with a sigh. "Your grandfather always liked to keep secrets," my father would add. Like that explained everything. What they really meant was simple. He didn't fit into their version of a successful life. No big house. No savings anyone could point to. No stories he was willing to tell at the dinner table. So, over time, they stopped asking. And when people stop asking, they eventually stop seeing you at all. I noticed it more as I got older. At Thanksgiving, he'd sit at the far end of the table, quiet, hands wrapped around a coffee mug while everyone else talked over each other. My brother once joked that Grandpa's biggest achievement was not getting arrested, and the room filled with laughter like that was an acceptable thing to say. I remember looking at him when that happened, waiting for some kind of reaction. He just smiled faintly, like he'd heard worse and decided it wasn't worth correcting. That smile stayed with me longer than the joke did. He wasn't angry. He was used to it. When he got sick, nothing really changed, at least not for them. There was no urgency, no sudden shift in priorities. "He's always been stubborn," my mom said. "He'll be fine." But he wasn't. I was 2 states away when I got the call. A neighbor found him collapsed in his kitchen, said he'd been on the floor longer than anyone was comfortable admitting. No family had been there. No one had checked in. I requested emergency leave that night. By the time I got to the hospital, the room was quiet except for the steady rhythm of machines and the low hum of fluorescent lights. He looked smaller than I remembered, thinner. But when he saw me, he smiled. Same way he always did. "Guess you're the only one who remembered me," he said, voice barely above a whisper. I told him not to talk like that. Told him Mom and Dad would come. He didn't argue. He just shook his head gently. "They won't," he said. "But that's all right." That was the part I didn't understand back then. Not the sickness, not the silence, but the acceptance. He wasn't surprised. He already knew how it would end. And somehow, he'd made peace with it long before the rest of us ever noticed. I wish I could say things changed after that. They didn't. When I called my parents, my mother was quiet for a moment. Then she let out a small sigh, like I'd just told her about a delayed flight. "Well," she said, "at least he's not suffering anymore." That was it. No rush to get on the road. No questions about the hospital. No, "Do you need help?" My father didn't even get on the phone. The responsibility just settled on me. The funeral was small. 5 people total, if you counted the priest. A neighbor showed up, the one who found him, and an older man I didn't recognize, who said he'd served with my grandfather a long time ago. He didn't give details, just shook my hand a little tighter than usual and said, "He was a good man." My parents didn't come. My brother texted me that morning. "Sorry, busy week." I remember standing there as they lowered the casket into the ground, listening to the sound of dirt hitting wood. It's a heavier sound than people think. Final. I kept waiting to feel angry. But I didn't. Not yet. Just quiet. After the service, I drove back to his house alone. It felt different without him in it. Still. Like the place itself knew something had ended. His coffee mug was still by the sink. A folded newspaper sat on the table, 3 days old. His jacket hung by the door like he might walk back in and reach for it. I didn't start with anything important. Just the basics. Clothes in one pile, old VHS tapes in another. Tools out in the garage, organized in a way that made sense only if you'd spent years working with your hands. Everything about his life was simple. Careful, deliberate, until I opened the top drawer of his dresser. That's where I found it, wrapped in a faded handkerchief, tucked in the back like it wasn't meant to be seen unless you were actually looking. The ring. Same one I'd seen on his hand my entire life. Up close, it looked even more ordinary. No shine left to it. Edges worn smooth from years of use. But when I turned it over, I saw it clearly for the first time. A small symbol etched on the inside. Not decorative. Not random. Precise. I ran my thumb over it, trying to make sense of it, and realized I couldn't. I remembered asking him about it once, years ago. He'd said, "It reminds me who I am." At the time, I let it go. This time, I didn't. I slipped it onto my finger without thinking. Not because I understood it. Just because it felt wrong to leave it behind. My parents never asked about it. They didn't ask about anything. 3 weeks later, the house was sold. "Too much upkeep," my father said. "No point holding on to it. No point holding on to it." I stood there the day they handed over the keys, looking at that front porch where he used to sit every morning, coffee in hand, watching a world that barely noticed him. And for the first time, something didn't sit right. It wasn't just grief, it was a question, because the more I thought about it, the less his life made sense. A Navy SEAL, with no stories. A man with no money problems, but no visible income. A life with no records, no photos, no trace. It didn't feel empty. It felt erased. And somehow, the only thing he chose to leave behind was the one thing I didn't understand at all. The ring. That was the only thing that didn't fit. Everything else about my grandfather's life could be explained away. Small town, simple habits, a man who kept to himself. But that ring, it felt intentional. Like it didn't belong to the version of him everyone else had decided was true. A few weeks later, I found myself standing in a place that couldn't have been more different from his quiet little house. A formal military ceremony. Dress blues, polished floors, rows of chairs filled with officers, veterans, families. The kind of room where everything is measured, posture, tone, even the way you shake someone's hand. I wore my uniform the way I'd been trained to. Every crease sharp, every detail in place. And, without thinking, I wore the ring. It had already become a habit by then. Something I didn't question anymore. I remember standing near the back at first, listening to speeches I'd heard variations of 100 times. Words like honor, service, sacrifice, spoken clearly, confidently, as if they could fully capture what those things meant. I nodded when I was supposed to, clapped when everyone else did. But part of me wasn't there. Part of me was still back in that house, still trying to understand a life that didn't add up. Then it happened. I was mid-conversation with another officer, nothing important, just small talk when the air shifted. That's the only way I can describe it. People don't usually notice when someone important walks into a room, but they feel it. Conversations pause just a second too long. Shoulders straighten. Space opens without anyone saying a word. I turned slightly and saw him. General Richard Whitaker. You don't need an introduction for someone like that. His presence says enough. Decades of command, carried without effort. The kind of man who doesn't raise his voice because he never has to. He was speaking with a small group near the front. And then, mid-sentence, he stopped. Not gradually, not politely, completely. His eyes had locked onto something. At first, I thought he was looking at me. Then I realized he wasn't. He was looking at my hand. At the ring. The conversation around him faded as he stepped away from the group without explanation. No one stopped him. No one questioned it. He walked straight toward me. Each step measured, controlled, but there was something underneath it. Urgency. I felt my pulse pick up before he even said a word. "Excuse me," he said quietly. I turned fully toward him, ready to respond the way you're trained to: formal, respectful, precise. But he wasn't looking at my face. He was staring at the ring. Up close now, I could see it clearly, the shift in his expression. Not curiosity. Not confusion. Recognition. And something else. Something I hadn't expected to see from a man like him. Uncertainty. "Where did you get this?" he asked. Same words as before, but now I understood the weight behind them. "It was my grandfather's," I said. "He passed away recently." He didn't blink. "What was his name?" "William Hale." That was when the room disappeared. Not literally, but everything else stopped mattering. Because in that moment, standing under bright lights with flags behind us and a room full of decorated service members just a few feet away, a 4-star general looked at me like I had just said something that wasn't supposed to exist. His jaw tightened slightly. He exhaled once, controlled. Then he said it again, quieter this time. "We need to talk, not later, not eventually. Now." And for the first time since I'd found that ring, I stopped thinking of it as a memory, and started realizing it might be evidence. I followed him without asking another question. He led me out of the main hall, past the rows of chairs and the low hum of conversation, into a smaller side room. No windows, just a table, 2 chairs, and the muffled sound of applause bleeding through the walls like it belonged to another world. He closed the door behind us. For a moment, he didn't speak. He just looked at the ring again, like he was confirming something he hadn't expected to see in his lifetime. "You said your grandfather's name was William Hale," he finally said. "Yes, sir." He nodded once, slow. "I was hoping you'd say something else." That caught me off guard. "Why?" Because for a brief second, I thought maybe I'd misunderstood everything. Maybe this was all coincidence. A similar ring, a similar name. But the way he looked at me told me that wasn't the case. "Because if that's true," he said quietly, "then you're wearing something that shouldn't exist anymore." I felt my stomach tighten. "What do you mean?" He pulled out a chair and gestured for me to sit. I didn't argue. "There are units," he said, choosing his words carefully, "that operate in places and under conditions where the United States government cannot officially be present." I'd heard versions of that before. Every service member has. It's the kind of thing that exists in rumors, in half-finished conversations. But hearing it from him was different. "They don't show up in reports," he continued. "They don't receive public recognition. In many cases, there's no record they were ever there at all." I felt my fingers curl slightly against the edge of the table. And my grandfather was part of that? The general met my eyes. For over a decade. The words didn't land all at once. They settled slowly, like something too heavy to drop all at once without breaking something. "That doesn't make sense," I said. I've seen his discharge papers. Navy SEAL. That's it. He nodded. That's all you were supposed to see. Silence filled the room again. Thicker this time. So, everything else, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, was erased? Not erased, he corrected. Never recorded. There's a difference. Erased means something existed once. This meant it never officially did. I leaned back slightly, trying to process it. The man who fixed bikes. The man who drank black coffee on a quiet porch. The man my family dismissed as difficult, irrelevant, had lived an entire life no one was ever meant to know about. Then the ring, I said. The general glanced at it again. That's not a decoration, he said. It's a marker. A marker for what? For identification, clearance, verification. He paused, just long enough for the weight of that to settle. Men in those units needed a way to recognize each other. Without paperwork, without names, without anything that could be traced. I looked down at it. Same piece of metal, same faint scratches. But now it felt completely different. Heavier. You recognized it immediately, I said. He nodded. There are very few left, he said. Most were destroyed when those operations were shut down or restructured. Why wasn't his? The general's expression softened just slightly. Because some men don't throw away the only proof they were ever there. I thought back to what my grandfather had said. It reminds me who I am. For the first time, I understood. He hadn't kept it because it was valuable. He kept it because it was the only thing that told the truth. And that truth was something the rest of the world had agreed to forget. I left that room carrying more than just answers. I carried questions that wouldn't sit still. Because once you know something like that, you can't just go back to how things were. You start looking at everything differently. Every memory, every detail you once ignored. That night, back in my quarters, I took the ring off for the first time since I'd put it on. I set it on the desk under a small lamp and just stared at it. Same ring, but now it felt like a locked door, and I didn't have the key. So I went back to the only place that made sense. His house. It hadn't sold yet, not officially. The paperwork was still in process, and I still had access. I drove out early the next morning, about a 15-minute stretch of empty road, the kind that gives you too much time to think. The place looked smaller than I remembered, or maybe I just saw it more clearly now. I wasn't there to sort things this time. I was there to look, really look. I went straight to his bedroom, opened the same drawer where I'd found the ring. Nothing new, but something told me I hadn't gone far enough. So I started checking places I'd ignored before. The back of the closet, behind old jackets, under the bed. That's when I found the box. Small, metal, taped to the inside of the wall behind a row of hanging coats. Not hidden well enough to disappear forever, but hidden well enough that you had to be looking for something to find it. Inside were 3 things. A folded American flag, a single sheet of paper with names written in careful handwriting, and a thin black notebook. No lock, no label, just waiting. I opened the notebook first. Page after page of numbers, dates, coordinates, short codes, no explanations, no full sentences, just fragments like someone documenting something that wasn't meant to be understood by anyone else. But every few pages, there it was, the same symbol as the one inside the ring. Again, and again, and again. My pulse picked up. This wasn't random. This was a record. Not one meant for the public. Not one meant for history books. But a record all the same. I took pictures of every page. Then I did something I hadn't planned on doing. I called the general. He didn't sound surprised. "Bring it," he said, "but not here. Meet me at the Veterans Center." When I arrived, he wasn't alone. 2 other men were there. Older. Civilian clothes. But the way they stood, the way they watched the room, told me everything I needed to know. They'd lived in the same world my grandfather had. They didn't say much. They didn't need to. They flipped through the notebook slowly, carefully. One of them let out a quiet breath. "He kept records," he said. "Better than most." I looked at the general. "What does it mean?" He closed the notebook gently. "These are operational markers," he said. "Dates, movements, confirmations." "So it's proof," I said. He shook his head slightly. "Not the kind you can show publicly." I felt frustration rise. "Then what is it for?" He looked at me steady, direct. "For understanding." I thought about that. All those years, my family thought there was nothing to understand. And now I was sitting in a quiet room, holding proof that my grandfather had lived a life no one around him had even tried to see. Not because it wasn't there, but because it was easier to believe there was nothing at all. I couldn't carry it alone anymore. Not the notebook, not the ring, not what it all meant. So I drove to my parents' house that weekend. Same driveway, same front porch, same familiar place that suddenly didn't feel familiar at all. My mom was in the kitchen when I walked in, wiping down the counter like it was any other Saturday. My dad was at the table, flipping through his phone. My brother was on the couch, half watching a game. Normal. That's what hit me the hardest. Everything felt normal, like nothing had happened, like a man hadn't died alone just a few weeks earlier. I need to show you something, I said. No one looked worried. Not yet. I set the notebook down on the table. Then the printed photos. Then the letter. My father glanced at it first, barely interested. That old thing? He said. I threw that out years ago. I know, I said. I got it back. He shrugged. It's just numbers. It's not, I said. It's a record. That got his attention just enough. My mom sighed, already impatient. What is this about? It's about Grandpa, I said. And just like that, the air shifted. Not curiosity. Resistance. I've already been through this, she said. We don't need to dig everything up again. You never dug anything up, I replied. Silence. Then my father leaned back slightly, arms crossed. All right, he said. So what are you trying to prove? I held his gaze. That you were wrong. That landed harder than anything else I'd said. My mom let out a short, disbelieving laugh. About what? That he liked to pretend he was more important than he was? No, I said, steady. About everything. I pushed the letter toward them. Read it. My father hesitated, then picked it up. At first, his expression didn't change. Then it did. Subtle, but I saw it. His eyes slowed. His grip tightened slightly on the paper. He read it again, this time more carefully. This isn't... He started, then stopped. It is, I said. A general confirmed it. Multiple people who served with him confirmed it. My mom shook her head. You're being dramatic. He was part of a unit that doesn't exist on paper, I said. Operations that were never officially recorded. That's not possible, she said. It is, I replied. It just wasn't something you were ever willing to see. That was the moment everything broke open. Not loudly, but completely. My brother finally spoke, his voice quieter than I expected. He asked me for help once, he said. A couple years ago. I looked at him. What happened? I told him I was busy. No one said anything after that. My mother sat down slowly. I thought... She started, her voice softer now. I thought he just wanted attention. He wanted time, I said. My father stared at the table. All those years, he said quietly. I thought he was hiding from responsibility. I shook my head. He was carrying it. That one didn't need explanation. They understood. For the first time, they actually understood. Not who they thought he was, but who he had been all along. And the weight of that realization settled over the room in a way none of us could ignore anymore. No one raised their voice. No one argued. That was the strangest part. For years, every conversation about my grandfather had ended the same way, dismissed, redirected, minimized. But now, there was nowhere left to hide from the truth sitting right in front of us. My father leaned forward, elbows on the table, staring at the notebook like it might change if he looked at it long enough. I don't understand, he said quietly. If all of this is real, why didn't he ever say anything? I let out a slow breath. Because he couldn't, I said. And eventually, because you stopped listening. That one stayed in the air. My mother's eyes filled, but she didn't look away this time. I thought he was just difficult, she whispered. Always avoiding questions, always changing the subject. He wasn't avoiding, I said. He was protecting. Protecting what? She asked. People, I said. Lives, identities, missions that weren't supposed to exist. They both sat with that, trying to reconcile the man they remembered with the man they had never taken the time to know. My brother shook his head slowly. I used to think he was just there, he said. Like background. I nodded. Yeah, I said. So did I. That was the part that hit me the hardest. Not just what they'd missed, but what I had. Because even though I showed up, even though I cared, I never really asked the right questions either. I just assumed there wasn't anything to find. The room felt smaller somehow, quieter, like everything we thought we understood about him had been stripped away. And what was left was something heavier, something harder to face. "He saved people," I said finally. "Multiple." The general confirmed it. "There are men still alive because of him." My father closed his eyes briefly. "And no one knows," he said. I shook my head. "No medals, no recognition, no records." My mother wiped her eyes. "That's not fair," she said. I looked at her. He didn't do it for fairness. That was the moment it shifted. Not just understanding. Respect. Real respect. The kind that doesn't come from titles or money or anything you can point to. The kind that comes too late. My father exhaled slowly, his voice rougher now. "I spent my whole life measuring people by what they showed," he said. "What they had. What they achieved." He glanced at the notebook again. And I missed the most important part of my own father. No one corrected him, because there was nothing to correct. My brother leaned back, staring at the ceiling for a second. "I used to think success meant being seen," he said. He lowered his gaze. "Guess I was wrong." I thought about that. All those years, we mistook silence for emptiness. We thought because he didn't talk about his life, there was nothing worth talking about. But the truth was the opposite. He had lived a life so heavy, it couldn't be spoken. "He wasn't invisible," I said quietly. They both looked at me. "He was unseen." That landed. You could feel it, because that's what this really was. Not just a misunderstanding, a choice. They had chosen not to look deeper. And now, they were finally seeing him for the first time. Not as the quiet man in the corner. Not as the difficult father. But as someone who had carried more than any of us ever realized, and never asked for a single thing in return. That was the part none of us could escape. Not anymore. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy. Like something had finally settled into place after years of being ignored. My father was the first to speak. "What do we do now?" he asked. Not defensive. Not dismissive. Just honest. I hadn't heard that tone from him before, not when it came to my grandfather. "You can't fix the past," I said, "but you can decide what you do with it." He nodded slowly, like he understood exactly what that meant. A few days later, he called me. "We want to do something," he said. "Something right." I didn't ask what that meant. I just said, "Okay." The second service wasn't big. That was intentional. No announcements, no public recognition, no attempt to turn it into something it wasn't. Just people who had actually known him. Neighbors. A few veterans from the local center. The man who had come to the first service stood near the front again, quieter this time. Even General Whitaker came. He didn't stand out. Didn't wear anything that drew attention. Just another man in the back of the crowd. That felt appropriate. We weren't there for rank. We were there for truth. The headstone had been replaced. Simple. Clean. No mention of Navy SEAL. No reference to classified operations. Just his name, his years, and the words. Beloved father and grandfather. I noticed that, not because it was impressive, but because it was honest. For the first time, we weren't trying to define him by what we didn't understand. We were acknowledging what we had failed to see. My father stepped forward after the priest finished. He didn't hold a paper, didn't prepare anything. He just stood there for a moment, looking at the headstone like he was trying to say something he should have said years ago. "I spent my whole life trying to prove myself," he said, "chasing things people could see." He paused. "And I missed the one person who never needed to prove anything at all." No one moved. No one interrupted. Because we all knew who he was talking about. My mother stood beside him, her hand trembling slightly as she placed a small bouquet at the base of the stone. "I thought strength looked loud," she said softly. "I thought it had to be visible." She wiped her eyes. "I was wrong." My brother stepped up last. He didn't say much. Just set down a folded American flag carefully, deliberately. "I should have listened," he said. That was it, but it was enough. We didn't need a long speech. We didn't need details about missions or secrets or anything that had been hidden. Because this wasn't about revealing everything. It was about finally acknowledging what mattered. After the service, my father told me they had sold the house. I already knew that part, but then he added something else. "We donated the money," he said, "to a veteran assistance fund." I looked at him. "In his name?" He shook his head. "No," he said, quietly. I felt something shift when he said that. Not pride, not relief. Something steadier. Understanding. For the first time, they weren't trying to correct their mistake with attention. They were doing it the way he would have, without needing anyone to notice. And maybe that didn't erase what had happened. Maybe it never would. But it meant something. Because for the first time in their lives, they weren't just saying they understood him. They were finally acting like they did. A few weeks later, I drove out to the cemetery alone. It was early morning. Cool air, quiet roads, the kind of stillness you only notice when you're not rushing anywhere. The headstone stood exactly the way we left it. Simple, steady, nothing extra. I stood there for a while before saying anything. Then I took the ring off, held it in my hand. Just for a moment. It felt different now. Not like a mystery. Not like a burden. Like a responsibility. I get it now, I said quietly. Not everything. Not the missions. Not the details. Not the parts of his life that were never meant to be known. But enough. Enough to understand what mattered. For most of my life, I thought success looked like something you could point to: rank, titles, recognition. That's what I was taught. That's what my parents believed too. And my grandfather never fit into any of that. So we assumed there was nothing there. We were wrong. He didn't need to be seen. He chose not to be. And there's a difference. I slipped the ring back onto my finger. Not because of what it proved, but because of what it reminds me to do. To pay attention, to listen a little longer, to look twice at the people no one else notices. Because the truth is, the quiet ones are rarely empty. Sometimes, they're just carrying more than anyone ever thinks to ask about. This story reminds us that the people we overlook are often the ones carrying the greatest weight. In a world that measures success by visibility, titles, and recognition, it's easy to miss quiet strength. William Hale didn't need to prove his worth, he lived it, silently. The real lesson is simple but uncomfortable. We often don't ask, don't listen, and don't look closely until it's too late. Take time to notice the quiet ones in your life. Ask questions. Be present. Because sometimes, the greatest regret isn't what someone failed to do, it's what we failed to see.